on all the ways in which our nation will be honoring the 41st president as we talk about his life and legacy. But, you know, the news always rolls, Ed, as we know, and things are developing on the southern border in Tijuana. And then we start with a Fox News alert about that. Tijuana shuts down a caravan camp near the border, kicking out thousands of migrants.
They say filthy conditions and health risks force them to make a move.
Our man near the border, you know him well, Griff Jenkins. He's embedded with the caravan. He has the latest. Good morning, Griff.
Good morning, guys. The gates behind me to the original shelter are closed and locked, but you can see there's still just a few hundred have remained in the street here. And, you know, Emily, you talked about filthy. Let me just show you. This is the pile of trash that is amassed as they were pulling the migrants out and moving them to a new shelter. It's just unbelievable, the unsanitary conditions, perhaps certainly a leading factor as to why so many of them are sick. Now, they've been moved to a new shelter about 7 miles away from the border. It's an outdoor venue, but it's all concrete. We're not allowed in there. Perhaps we'll get in there later on today. But the big news amongst this caravan when they were here, a 46-year-old convicted murderer from Honduras traveling with the caravan, apprehended about a mile from where I'm standing. He was traveling with two other members of the caravan. His name is Miguel Angel Ramirez. And so obviously more criminals coming across the border. We saw two teens as well, a photo of them digging under the fence. That's just something that continuously happens along the border. But the real news across Mexico in the field here, guys, is the new president, right? AMLO, as he's known, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, sworn in as Mexico's president. And we anticipate that there will be some news coming out of it because we have the foreign minister from this new administration in Washington meeting with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo today. Finally, I just want to leave you with one soundbite. And all of this movement has been driven by Pueblos Sin Fronteras, an organization that translates people with open borders. The leader, Enrique Mujica, he wants more asylum processing from the U.S. Here's what he had to say.
We are trying to do things peacefully, and if we can ask anything to the United States to process a little bit faster the number of asylum seekers and let the courts decide. We don't want any special treatment.
He says peacefully, but the mayor of Tijuana wants him arrested on federal charges for bringing this mess to his border town to begin with. Guys?
Hey, Griff, can you give us a quick update? Are there any, you've been in touch with leaders of the caravan. Are there going to be more efforts to move toward the border? Have they paused? What's the latest?
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, Pete, there was a flyer put out saying, open these borders, we demand a big march. It didn't happen. We believe in part because Tijuana officials told the 6,000 migrants, if you show up and rest that border again, you will be deported on site. However, already in talking to the police here, they say there could be a march again today. Obviously, 1 week ago, last week, we saw that march. So it's a very fluid situation, and we're going to be on standby in case they do try and make another statement. Particularly yesterday's attempt was to send a message to the new president. We'll see if that happens today.
All right, Griff.
Griff, thanks a lot. I mean, the guy's literally got his ear to the ground about what's happening there. Yeah. And it shows you that policies have consequences and results. I mean, when you say our border is closed, we're not going to let you run across the border, people have to find another place to go. And in this case, they've moved further away from the border, and the result is in question.
And that even when coverage stops, that's still happening. That trash is piling up. The diseases are spreading. There are spaces that need to be filled there. I mean, it's still happening no matter what. So it's good that we keep covering it and Griff's down there.
Yeah, and there's another thread running through all this when you think about Griff's reports over the last few weeks, which is that the president from the beginning has said this is a threat to our border. This is a threat to the United States. And critic after critic has said that the president is wrong. The president had said many times there are criminals among their midst. We heard critics say, no, it's just mostly women and children. It's not young men. It's not criminals. The president's making it up. You saw reporters challenging the president's account and saying it wasn't going to be an invasion. There are not criminals in the caravan. Guess what? There are criminals in the caravan, and Tom Homan is saying, the former ICE chief is saying, the president was right all along. Watch.
Regardless if they want to come forward or not in their criminal history, we're going to find a lot of it out through our other methods. So if we've already verified over 500, and this isn't talking about the hundreds more that we can't verify. There's a suspicion, but we haven't yet to verify it to be able to say absolutely the criminals. There's more than 500. Just 500 that we can verify. President Trump has been right 100% of the time when it comes to border security. Everything he has done on the border makes sense from the perspective of law enforcement, from the perspective of the rule of law and the sovereignty of this country.
500 that they can verify. Listen, the press loves to not listen to DHS numbers and pretend like they're fake, but they listen to everything Bob Mueller says, or doesn't say, or might say. I mean, the bias
took a
is
turn there.
Oh, I did. Russia's always bubbling under the surface, Ed. But the reality is we're the only ones covering this, and the president has stuck to it.
I thought we were
They
only
said it was
covering it
about
because of the midterms.
Exactly.
No, the midterms are over, and guess what? It's still out there. It's still a threat, and there's still criminals in their midst. So that was another lie.
It's true.
Yeah.
And the new president of Mexico, Obrador, he just officially assumed office this weekend. So we'll be looking forward to the president working with him as well, because behind the scenes, as the press is not covering it from the left, they're collaborating.
Yeah, if you're not going to build a wall, you got to do something. We'll see what happens.
A big issue for the president to confront. President Trump was at the G20 summit, now back at the White House. Before he left the G20 summit, he offered his condolences to the late President George H.W. Bush, and the entire nation, Emily, is about to do that as well.
Absolutely. Starting tomorrow, he'll lie in state in the U.S. Capitol before being laid to rest back home in Texas.
Our own Casey Stiegel is live in Houston with how the late president will be honored this week. Casey, good morning.
Hey, good morning to you guys. Right now, the former president is right here at the at the Lewis and Sons Funeral Home in Houston, and preparations are underway in Texas, multiple locations, and of course in the nation's capital as people get ready to say goodbye to George Herbert Walker Bush. Tomorrow, the body will be flown from Houston to Washington, D.C., where it will lie in state until the funeral on Wednesday at the nation's cathedral. At the National Cathedral is where, of course, the funeral will take place. Once that concludes, Mr. Bush returns to Houston, where he'll lie in repose at his church, and then another funeral service will be held for him here on Thursday before he's finally taken by train to College Station, Texas, and laid to rest at his presidential library and museum. Mourners have been coming by the library to light candles, drop off flowers, do anything they can to show respect for an individual who dedicated his life and his family's life to public service and to our country. Back to you guys.
All right, Casey Stiegel, we appreciate your report. We'll get back to you. We also have a lot of guests coming up, people who served in the Bush administration. They'll have their reflections. But as Pete noted at the top of the hour, the news rolls on. The president of the United States, the current president, had a major deal to announce in China. It's really just sort of part one, a ceasefire in the trade war with China after a steak dinner with President Xi Jinping. You see him there across the table from the president, flanked by his aides. But there are a lot of hard issues yet to be worked out.
That's right. So they're at the G20 in Buenos Aires. A lot of eyes on will they get a deal, will they not get a deal? Well, we've got news. They did make a deal, if temporary. These are the aspects of the trade deal reached with China. A 90-day truce to negotiate a larger trade agreement. They're going to delay, Trump's going to delay raising tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods. They were set to go to 25% at the first of the year. China's going to buy substantial amounts of U.S. products, most importantly, agriculture products, which has been a big focus in the news. And if no deal is set after 90 days, then tariffs increase to 25%. So it's a big deal that China feels the heat so much that they're coming to the table. This buys enough time for a larger deal, and I think nothing was really given of consequence or taken, but it sets the table hopefully for more.
And I think what's so remarkable, too, is that for only 4 things, that's a really broad scope for essentially reassuring us and really the emotional tenor of the country in terms of having the fact that the Chinese will buy more and then giving that 90-day deadline. That's tremendous because we have with a 25% increase threat behind it, it means that that's the force needed in addition to the other.
And look, it's a little bit like the immigration deal because you heard critic after critic there say the president's wrong, it's a fool's errand, that the caravan is not a big threat. We heard that on China as well. President's on a fool's errand. He's going after this trade thing. It's going to nail our economy. It's reckless. It's ridiculous. And instead, he not only has China at the table, as Stuart Varney pointed out last hour, president's taking a hard line with China.
The market and the economy, and Americans generally, I think, wanted a ceasefire and a truce. And that's what we've got. If they don't have a deal in 90 days, the president says, those 25% major tariffs, they're back on again. So he's maintaining a very hard line in a very difficult situation to come to a final agreement. Xi Jinping, he's got a deal with the Chinese people. You get prosperity, you get whopping great big economic growth. In return, we, the communists, keep power. If that road to prosperity is interrupted, and it could well be with a trade war with America, Xi's got a problem. So he's under great pressure.
An important point, because China's economy is not where it was. The growth that they had, the massive growth, has slowed down. The president, our president, saw an opportunity to press them while they're on defense, and that's what he's doing. It's not done yet, but he's made progress.
I don't think there's anything more important that this president is doing for the long-time legacy of this country. Don't listen to the chattering class of the media elites here in New York. Oh, the stock market, oh, this. This is for the worker. This is for leveling the playing field in a geopolitical fight. We are in, whether we like it or not, with the Chinese. They want to supplant us. Do we win or do they win? That's what it stands for. All right, turning now to your headlines. More than 500 aftershocks are rocking Alaska while cleanup is underway following a massive earthquake. The 7.0 magnitude earthquake ripped open roads and cracked buildings near Anchorage. Alaska's last devastating earthquake hit in 1964. American strength is on display under President Trump. The U.S. has ramped a bombing campaign against the Taliban in Afghanistan, a dramatic increase in airstrikes over the last 2 years, all aimed at forcing the terror group to engage in.
All right, chaos erupting in Paris. Hundreds of protesters arrested for burning cars and attacking police. They're now vowing to keep rioting over rising taxes until Christmas. Dr. Sebastian Gorka is here to weigh in. Coming up, remember, President Macron is under fire. He was lecturing President Trump not too long ago. We got that coming up.
Your success now is our country's success. I'm rooting hard for you. Good luck.
That was former President Bill Clinton, of course, reading a letter that the late President George H.W. Bush famously left for him the day he took office in 1993. Bush's united we succeed tone is unfortunately rarely heard in our political discourse today. Here to discuss, presidential historian Doug Wead. Good morning, Doug.
Hey, hi, Ed. How are you doing?
When you hear that letter, especially in President Clinton's own words, it really is quite moving to think about the approach that President Bush had.
Absolutely. He was forgiving. He was not weak. People make that mistake sometimes because he was so kind. Just ask Manuel Noriega how weak he is. He could be quite tough, make very tough decisions, but he was kind. And he usually had, Ed, a stalking horse. John Sununu was a very tough and effective chief of staff. But before him, he had Craig Fuller, he had Pete Teeley, he had Jennifer Fitzgerald. In the family, he had George W. Bush. So he always relied on a stalking horse, somebody tough that would take the lead, and he could come in and be kind and heal the wounds and make things work.
In fact, we have John Sununu coming up in a few moments. We'll get his reflections. We've got Bill Bennett coming up. We've got a lot of people who have a lot of wonderful stories to tell. But I wonder, when you think about all of this, connected to now, you have President Trump's critics constantly on his back, and we could talk about what he needs to do to set a better tone. But what about Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, who now have a responsibility to govern? Will they take Bush 41's approach and actually try to work with this president, or is it just going to be more resist?
Yeah, you make a good point, Ed. I think it's exaggerated, some of the attacks on Donald Trump, because a lot of this is just politics, the way politics is. It's true that George H.W. Bush's personality could be so disarming and so kind, but politics was tough back then, just as tough today. Remember Lee Atwater. Remember the Willie Horton campaign. Sure. That's how George H.W. Bush was elected. He hated bullies, Ed, and there was an attack on Craig Fuller when Kuwait hired him as a consultant, and he came in the Oval Office, and the news media was saying, oh, the Kuwaitis wasted $1 million on Craig Fuller. And I heard that Craig Fuller brought in the story of a little boy in Kuwait that was machine gunned to death for passing out leaflets opposing Saddam Hussein's invasion. When I heard that, Ed, I thought, we're going to war because George H.W. Bush does not like bullies, and Craig Fuller earned every dollar he got paid.
You're right. An important point for us to underscore. President Bush talked about a kinder, gentler nation, but he had a spine of steel. Doug Wead, we appreciate you coming in with your reflections. Good point to make.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, next, Paris burning. These pictures you won't believe. Protests over high gas prices turn into chaos for yet another weekend. Dr. Sebastian Gorka says it's ironic
Welcome back. Couple of quick headlines for you. President Trump is meeting with top Democrats this week, likely to talk about the border wall in hopes of preventing a government shutdown. As part of that, I also had a chance to sit down with House Armed Services Chairman Mac Thornberry at the Reagan National Defense Forum in California to talk about another hot topic, and that is funding of the military in the budget. Listen.
Building up our military is first the right thing to do for the men and women who are risking their lives for us. But secondly, it helps make it less likely that we'd ever have to fight. Peace does come through strength.
Because one of the first proposals from the White House did include a 5% potential reduction in defense spending. There are concerns about that. We'll see where that debate plays out. And a second U.S.-North Korea summit could happen as soon as next month to further denuclearization efforts. President Trump says 3 sites are being considered for the possible January or February meeting with Kim Jong-un. We'll see.
Watch closely. French President Macron, meanwhile, calling an emergency government meeting in Paris today as furious protesters get more violent for the 3rd straight week.
More than 400 arrested for torching cars, vandalizing landmarks, and attacking police, stealing their assault weapons as they protest Macron, calling on him to step down over rising taxes.
Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to the president, author of the book, Why We Fight, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, joins us now. Dr. Gorka, thanks for being here this morning. So it was just a couple of weeks ago that Macron was lecturing our president and us about nationalism and patriotism. Turns out he's got a problem on his hands.
He does. How ironic, Pete. This is really, he should take a lesson out of
about standing up for America first, such as this trade battle with China, such as Mexico and Canada.
Right.
You had critic after critic saying he'll never get a deal. And now it looks like maybe he is getting a deal.
Absolutely. Look at what's happening. He's put the squeeze on China. He's closed the deals with Canada, Mexico, just as you say. At the end of the day, nationalism, look it up in the dictionary, Mr. President, Macron, is about devotion to your country, love of country. And if it weren't for American nationalism, President Macron would be speaking German today, Ed.
Yeah, speaking of our nation's security, Representative Mac Thornberry is still the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. I had a chance to ask him about China, not just the trade aspect, but also them as an adversary. Listen to what he had to say.
I mean, if you ask people what's the most difficult challenge, it's probably all the things China is doing, including new technologies, artificial intelligence and robotics and hypersonics and so forth. In some ways, the world is more dangerous now than it was during the Cold War time because we have so many different kinds of threats.
China front and center.
Mac's a great guy. He knows of what he speaks. I came into the White House to do counterterrorism, but once you get the clearances, Pete, once you read the classified intel, you realize, and I wrote in Why We Fight, it is China. China is the #1 strategic threat we face as a nation because they wish to displace us. They wish to replace America as the most powerful nation in the world, and that's bad for everybody because China is still a communist dictatorship.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to live in history and realize that we thought communism was in the ash heap, the dump. Right. But here it is right in front of us.
Yeah, communism is not dead. Francis Fukuyama, when he wrote that book, how wrong could he get it? The End of History and The Last Man. If you look at Cuba, if you look at North Korea, if you look at China, these are places that still have labor camps. This is 2018, and these are still dictatorships.
Dr. Gorka, thanks for coming in early this Sunday.
Good stuff,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right, our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, says Iran tested a ballistic missile and it could strike as far as Europe. We're live in D.C. with a look at that ever-gathering threat as well.
Plus, he was the late President Bush's former chief of staff at the White House. Now, John Sununu joins us live to take a look back at his former boss's life and legacy. That things you could talk about. Pick anything you want, but coming out of that State of the Union where he stood strong, that might be one place to begin.
Well, you know, he was a much stronger man than people give him credit for. He, as Doug Weed said, his kindness overshadowed his real strength. But he was a president that believed in missions accomplished, and I think historians are beginning to understand that his administration was full of missions accomplished. It may have been a one-term administration, but he crammed on both the foreign policy side and the domestic side, great result after great result.
What were some of those? I mean, because you're right. The immediate reflection on a one term was that it was a failure, it was mediocre, but as time has looked at it and historians have looked at it, they've begun to look at it differently. Explain a few of those accomplishments or missions accomplished that he had.
Well, of course, I recommend people read my book, The Quiet Man, for a full list. But look, on legislation, the Clean Air Bill was stalled for 13 years, and he found a formula that got it through Congress. The extension of the Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the budget that he was so aggressively attacked for produced the only a few years of surpluses, the only few years of surpluses we've had in generations. He passed legislation and rules and regulations that set the foundation for opening up energy in the U.S. That's how we are now energy independent. He passed the crime bill. The list goes on, and it covers the full gamut of what's important to America then and continues to be in effect and important to America today.
And John, you've mentioned his quiet leadership. Share with us an anecdote or a story about him demonstrating that to you during your time with him.
Well, I think the famous one that people have talked about this weekend is the way he handled the collapse of the Berlin Wall. He knew he had to be, he loved what was happening, but he had to demonstrate a quiet demeanor, or else Mikhail Gorbachev would have to deal with aggressively with the hardliners who were trying to replace him. But the quiet leadership on domestic legislation, he had friends on the Republican side and the Democrat side, and he would bring them in for quiet conversations, and they would negotiate their differences and find a way that they could create legislation that was win-win.
Governor, what will you miss the most about H.W. Bush?
You know, in these last years, as he and I and Barbara and my wife Nancy aged, we used to drive up 2 or 3 times in the summer to see him in Kennebunk. And it was always a great time to reminisce. And really, 4 old friends sitting there and talking about the great days. And it was a chance for me to let him know how much I appreciated his leadership. Those days are obviously gone, and I shall miss them.
Well, we hear the emotion in your voice. We appreciate your service to our nation as well as his chief of staff and so many other important posts. And we obviously all miss the president as well. Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir,
for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turning now to your headlines. A pair of New Jersey Democratic leaders are caught.
Service. I'm giving back.
82-year-old Ron Bates crafting the military-themed display by himself. He says the thank you sign on his roof serves as a message board for nearby jet pilots flying from Colorado's Buckley Air Force Base. And those are your headlines.
It's cool. It's that's a lot of work right there.
Yeah. What about that parking lot fight? That was.
Or the shark. How does the kid know what it's like to be bitten by an alien?
I don't know. Have you ever been bitten by an alien, Rick?
No, not that I know of.
Not that you know of.
Maybe we have been and we're not aware.
Exactly.
It's out there.
Wouldn't know. Interesting.
Deep thoughts.
Ponder that while I'm doing the weather, guys. All right, let's take a look at the weather. A lot going on across the country. You get an idea here. It's a big storm that brought a lot of snow across parts of the plains and a lot of severe weather into the plains and to the south. Yesterday, 22 reports of tornadoes in Illinois, which is very uncommon for this time of year. Usually tornadoes are down across parts of the southeast, and we could be seeing that later on again today. We have 1 tornado watch. It's in effect across southern parts of Georgia until 11 o'clock this morning. Be very careful. It's that little line of storms, and it's not moving very quickly, so you're going to get the same rain falling over the same area for the next number of hours, and that could cause some localized flooding as well. Northern side of the storm bringing some big rain across parts of the mid-Atlantic towards areas of the Northeast, snow across much of Maine. But the bigger event of this snow has been across parts of Nebraska, where we've seen some spots pick up over a foot of snow again. It's the second week in a row of this kind of snow. So for being so early into the winter season, certainly getting some incredible snow so far. Guys, meteorological winter began yesterday. Do you know what that is?
No.
Nope.
No, that's the majority of winter precipitation or winter weather happens from December 1st to March 1st or to the end of February. So we are in meteorological winter now.
Sounds like
I don't want to be
another
here. I
umbrella
don't want to
then.
be here. Tell me when we're out of meteorological winter.
Yeah, March 1st. Then we're in meteorological spring.
All right, we got some time.
No. I mean, remind us again
Meteorological
once
winter.
we're out of it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, let me remind you what's coming up. Mike Pompeo says Iran tested a ballistic missile and it could strike as far as Europe. This is big news. We're live in Washington with a look at that growing threat now.
Yeah, it's not good. And country music star Larry Gatlin had a decades-long relationship with former President George H.W. Bush. He joins us to share his memories, including performing at the Bush 41 inauguration in 1989.
Mr. President-elect, you have challenged us to become a kinder, gentler nation, and to the spirit of that noble challenge, we'd like to dedicate this song. It's the healing stream of love.
Rumored 2020 presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg is heading to Iowa this week.
Yeah, he's a
Former New York
Democrat
City
now.
mayor.
Yeah.
Recently registered as a Dem. He was a Republican. He's an independent. He'll be hosting a panel on climate change on Tuesday. Iowa, home to the first contest, of course, in the primary and caucus season. And Eric Holder also heading to the Hawkeye State in what some believe is an indicator he's running for president. The Obama-era Attorney General will visit next year to talk about redistricting, voting rights, and law enforcement. He has said publicly the idea of a face-off against President Trump is appealing. So basically, who's not running?
Yeah,
Exactly.
it begins.
Literally.
It begins. All right, well, moving on to another story. Secretary Pompeo is condemning Iran for testing a ballistic missile.
The nation's top diplomat is accusing the rogue regime of violating a United Nations resolution.
We've got Jillian Turner all over this story early this morning in the nation's capital. Good morning, Jillian.
Good morning, Ed. The Trump administration accusing the Iranian regime this weekend of testing yet another medium-range ballistic missile. This one capable of carrying multiple warheads within striking distance of Europe and the Middle East. The State Department says the test amounts to a clear violation of UN Security Resolution 2231, which forbids Iran from undertaking any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology. And in a statement, Secretary Pompeo says, as we've been warning for some time, Iran's missile testing and missile proliferation is growing. We are accumulating risk of escalation in the region if we fail to restore deterrence. We condemn these activities and call upon Iran to cease immediately all activities related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons. Now, Iran's foreign ministry has put out a statement of its own contending the entire missile program is defensive in nature, meaning this and all other testing is undertaken in response to threats from the U.S. and other hostile countries around the world. Tehran also insisting yesterday testing isn't prohibited under the UN resolution the U.S. has cited. So yet another indication that the Rouhani regime's backtracking on its commitment to the Iran nuclear deal, of which, as you know, guys, only Europe, Russia, China, and Iran now remain a party to.
All right.
That's right. Jillian, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We got to keep on that story.
Absolutely.
Iran is still a big threat. All right, country music star Larry Gatlin had a decades-long friendship with the former President Bush. He joins us to share his memories, including performing at the 1989 inauguration.
Mr. President-elect, you have challenged us to become a kinder, gentler nation, and to the spirit of that noble challenge, we'd like to dedicate this song.
To see footage like that, you were able to play at his inauguration, but you knew former President H.W. Bush decades before that as well. Talk to us about your relationship with him and the man.
Well, I was just a kid in Odessa. They lived in Midland, of course, and Brother Steve, Brother Rudy, and our sister, baby sister LaDonna. We went to a little place called Floyd Gwynn Park, a city park in Odessa, for one of then George Bush's first campaign rallies to raise some money for his first congressional run in '64 against Ralph Yarborough. So that's the first time we'd ever met those nice folks. 19 years later, after Steve and Rudy and I had had some success in the business, we'd never seen each other. In that interim, we were in that big room, I forget what they call it out there in the White House. I walked in, I saw him over with a gaggle of people. I walked over to pay my respects, and he said, "Hey, you're one of those snotty-nosed little Gatlin brothers. I told Barbara that when I saw you on the Tonight Show. It's good to see you again." He remembered. He said, "We were out at Floyd Gwynn Park in Odessa." An amazing recall. Wonderful man. Can I sing you another song? This is 10 seconds. Look here.
Of course you can.
More than just about any man can take, but he gave all he had to give. Just a prime example of a life well lived. I believe you can say that about my good friend. I miss him. I miss Miss Barbara. We're grateful to God for the relationship and the friendship we had with those great folks.
That was so awesome to hear. That was great.
Very cool. What in your, I mean, a lot of people have used that phrase. I have as well, a life well lived. What is it about the life lived by H.W. Bush that you admire the most?
Well, another transplanted Texan, my friend, the late, great Coach Darrell Royal at the University of Texas, He told me one time, he said, you can tell what kind of person someone is by the way they treat people who can't do anything for them.
Yeah.
Well, what? Of course, they might have could have voted for him. He treated everybody with that same warm, gentle, self-deprecating humor, and I admire him for that. I fall short of that sometimes. Sometimes you get tired.
Yeah.
You're on the road. You don't want to sign another autograph. I never saw him turn anyone down.
Larry,
sometimes service had to move him on, but he was a great gentleman.
You mentioned sense of humor. You had the fortune of going on a cruise to Greece, around Greece, as I understand, and the two of you went for a walk past a chapel.
We were on the Greek island of Vada Paidi, and we were walking up. We saw the beautiful chapel. I sang in there. The artifacts. They actually have Napoleon, what do you call it? Uniform. I went blank. That Napoleon wore at the Battle of Waterloo.
Wow.
This big. So we were walking back down after I had sung this beautiful chapel. We were all together, and I was walking a little bit in front, at a lot of people around him. And all of a sudden, as we say in Texas, I kind of got my Christmas goose early. You know what I mean? I kind of felt something nudge me on the back of the leg, and I didn't quite know what to do about that. And I walked a little farther down there, and it happened again. And I kind of looked around at my surrounding, and then I heard this, wow! And I turned around, and he pointed his walking stick at me. I got you that time, Gavin. He was a big word.
Larry, thank you for your insight this morning and for sharing that song. You really have an incredible arsenal of stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
God bless you all. God bless President George H.W. Bush.
All right. What a great way to put it.
Well said. All right, well, a Fox News alert. Tijuana shuts down a caravan camp near the border, kicking out thousands of migrants. Our own Griff Jenkins is embedded with the caravan in Mexico. Joins us live next hour.
Plus, Bush 41's former drug czar.